Train to Pakistan, Part 8. With the monsoon, the tempo of life and death increases. Almost overnight, grass begins to grow and trees turns green. Snakes, centipedes and scorpions are born out of nothing. The ground is strewn with earthworms, ladybirds and tiny frogs. At night, myriads of moths flutter around the lamps. They fall in everybody's food and water. Geckos dart about, filling themselves with insects till they get heavy and fall off ceilings. Inside rooms, the hum of mosquitoes is maddening. People spray clouds of insecticides, and the floor becomes a layer of wriggling bodies and wings. Next evening, there are many more fluttering around the lampshades and burning themselves in the flames. With the monsoon lasts and the shower starts and stops without warning. The clouds fly across, dropping their rain on the plains as it pleases them, till they reach the Himalayas. They climb up the mountain sides, then the cold squeezes the last drops of water out of them. Lightning and thunder never cease. All this happens in late August or early September. Then the season of rains gives way to autumn. A roll of thunder woke Hukumchand. He opened his eyes. There was a grey light in the room. In the corner, a very yellow flame flickered through the soot of the lamp chimney. There was a flash of lightning, followed by another peal of thunder. A gust of cool, damp breeze blew across the room. The lamp fluttered and went out. Raindrops began to fall in a gentle patter. Rain. At long last, the rain, thought the magistrate. The monsoon had been a poor one. Clouds had come, but they were high and fleecy and floated by, leaving the land thirstier than before. September was very late for the rain, but that only made it more welcome. It smelled good, it sounded good, it looked good, and above all, it did good. Ah, but did it? Hukum Chand felt feverish. The corpses, 1,000 charred corpses sizzling and smoking while the rain put out the fire. 100 yards of charred corpses. Beads of sweat broke out on his temples. He felt cold and frightened. He reached across the bed. The girl had left. He was all alone in the bungalow. He got his wristwatch from under the pillow and cupped his hands around the dial. The glow-worn green of the radium hands pointed to 6:30. He felt comforted. It was fairly late in the morning. The sky must be heavily overcast. Then he heard the sound of coughing on the veranda and felt reassured. He sat up with a jerk. A dull pain rocked his forehead. He shut and held his head between his hands. The throbbing ebbed away. After a few minutes, he opened his eyes, looked around the room, and saw the girl. She hadn't left. She was asleep on the big cane armchair, wrapped in her black sequined sari. Hukumchand felt a little foolish. The girl had been there 2 nights, and there she was sleeping all by herself in a chair. She was still, save for the gentle heaving of her bosom. He felt old and unclean. How could he have done anything to this child? If his daughter had lived, she would have been about the same age. He felt a pang of remorse. He also knew that his remorse and good resolutions went with the hangover. They always did. He would probably drink again and get the same girl over and sleep with her and feel badly about it. That was life, and it was depressing. He got up slowly and opened the attaché case that lay on the table. He looked at himself in the mirror on the side of the lid. There was a yellow rheum in the corner of his eyes. The roots of his hair were showing white and purple. There were several folds of flesh under his unshaven jaw. He was old and ugly. He stuck out his tongue. It was coated with a smooth pale yellow from the middle to the back. Dribble ran down the tip onto the table. He could smell his own breath. It must have been nauseating for the girl. No wonder she spent the night in an uncomfortable chair. Hukumchand took out a bottle of liver salts and put several large teaspoonfuls into a glass. He unscrewed the thermos flask and poured in the water. The effervescence bubbled over from the all sides of the tumbler onto the table. He stirred the water till the fizz. He stirred the glass till the fizz died down, and then drank it quickly. For some time he stood with his head bent and his hands resting on the table. The dose of salts gurgled down pleasantly. An airy fullness rose from the pit of his stomach up to his throat and burped out in a long, satisfying belch. The throbbing ebbed away and the ache receded into the back of his head. A few cups of strong hot tea, and he would be himself again. Hukum Chand went to the bedroom. From the door opening out towards the servants' quarter, he shouted for his bearer. Bring shaving water and bring my tea. Bring it here. I will take it in myself. When the bearer came, Hukum Chand took the tea tray and mug of hot shaving water into the bedroom and put them on the table. He poured himself a cup of tea and laid down his shaving things. He lathered his chin and shaved and sipped his tea. The tinkle of the china The tinkle of the china and silver did not disturb the girl. She slept with her mouth slightly open. She looked dead except for the periodic upward movement of her breast, vainly trying to fill her bodice. Her hair was scattered all over her face. A pink celluloid clip made in the shape of a butterfly dangled by the leg of the chair. Her sari was crushed and creased, and bits of sequins glistened on the floor. Hukum Chand could not take his eyes off her while he sipped his tea and shaved. He could not analyze his feelings except that he wanted to make up to her. If she wanted to be slept with, he would sleep with her. The thought made him uneasy. He would have to drink hard to do that to her now. The noise of shuffling feet and coughing on the veranda disturbed Hukum Chand's thoughts. It was a cough intended to draw attention. That meant the sub-inspector. Hukum Chand finished his tea and took his clothes into the bathroom to change. Afterwards, he went out of the door which opened towards the quarters and stepped onto the veranda. The sub-inspector was reading a newspaper. He jumped up from his chair and saluted. Has your honor been out walking in the rain? No, I just went round the servants' quarter. You are early. I hope all is well. These days one should be grateful for being alive. There is no peace anywhere. One trouble after another. Magistrate suddenly thought of the corpses. Did it rain in the night? How is it going near the railway station? I went by this morning when the rain had just started. There wasn't very much left, just a big heap of ashes and bones. There are many skulls lying about. I do not know what we can do about them. We have sent word to the Lambardar that no one is to be allowed near the bridge or the railway station. How many were there? Did you count? No, sir. The Sikh officer said there were more than 1,000. I think he just calculated how many people could get into a bogie and multiplied it by the number of bogies. He said that another 4 and 500 must have been killed on the roofs, on footboards, and between buffers. They must have fallen off when they were attacked. The roof was certainly covered with dried up blood. Hare Ram, Hare Ram. 1,500 innocent people. What else is a Kaliyug? There is darkness over the land. This is only one spot in the frontier. I suppose similar things are happening at other places. And now I believe our people are doing the same. What about the Muslims in these villages? This is what I come to report, sir. Muslims of some villages have started leaving for the refugee camps. Chundu Nagar has been partly evacuated. Pakistan army lorries with Baluchi and Pathan soldiers have been picking them up whenever information has been brought. But the Mano Majra Muslims are still there. And this morning the Lambardar reported the arrival of 40 or 50 Sikh refugees who had crossed the river by the ford at dawn. They are putting up at the temple. Why were they allowed to stop? Asked Hukum Chand sharply. You know very well the orders are that all incoming refugees must proceed to the camp at Jalandhar. This is serious. They may start the killing in Mano Majra. No, sir. The situation is well in hand up till now. These refugees have not lost much in Pakistan and apparently no one molested them on the way. The Muslims of Manomajra have been bringing them food at the temple. If others turn up who have been through massacre and have lost relations, then it will be a different matter. I had not thought of the river crossings. Usually, after the rains, the river is a mile in breadth, and there are no fords till November or December. We have hardly had any rain this year. There are several points where people can cross, and I have not got enough policemen to patrol the riverside. Hukumchand looked across the rest house grounds. The rain was falling unsteadily. Little pools had begun to form in the ditches. The sky was a flat stretch of slate grey. Of course, if it keeps raining, the river will rise and there will not be many fords to cross. One will be able to control refugee movements over the bridges. A crash of lightning and thunder emphasized the tempo of the rain. The wind blew a thin spray on the veranda, but we must get the Muslims out of this area whether they like it or not. The sooner the better. There was a long pause in the conversation. Both men sat staring into the rain. Hukumchand began to speak again. One should bow before the storm till it passes. See the pampas grace. It leaves bent before the breeze. The stem stands stiff in its plumed pride. When the storm comes, it cracks, and its white plum is scattered by the winds like fluffs of thistledown. After a pause, he added, a wise man swims with the current and still get across. The sub-inspector heard the platitudes with polite attention. He did not see their significance to his immediate problem. Hukumchand noticed the black expression on the police officer's face. He had to make things more plain. What have you done about Ramlal's murder? Have you made any further arrests? Yes, sir. Jagga Badmash gave us the names yesterday. They are men who were at one time in his own gang, Malli and four others from the village Khapur, 2 miles down the river. But Jagga was not with them. I have sent some constables to arrest them this morning. Hukumchand did not seem to be interested. He had his eyes fixed somewhere far away. We were not wrong about both Jagga and the other fellow. The inspector went on. I told you about the Jagga's liaison with the Muslim weaver's girl that kept him busy most nights. Malli threw bangles into the Jagga's courtyard after the dacoity. Hukumchand still seemed far away. If your honor agrees, we might release Jagga and Iqbal after we have got Malli and his companion. Who are Malli and his companions, Sikh or Muslim? Asked Hukumchand abruptly. All Sikhs. The magistrate relapsed into his thought once more. After some time he began to talk to himself. It would have been more convenient if they had been Mussulman. The knowledge of that and the agitator fellow being a leaguer would have persuaded Manomajra Sikhs to let their Muslims go. There was another long pause. The plan slowly pieced itself together in the sub-inspector's mind. He got up quickly without making any comment. Hukumchand did not want to take any chances. Listen, he said. Let Mali and his gang off without making any entry anywhere. But keep an eye on their movements. We will arrest them when we want to, and do not release the Badmash or the other chap yet. We may need them. The sub-inspector saluted. Wait, I haven't finished. Hukumchand raised his hand. After you have done the needful, send word to the commander of the police Muslim refugee camp asking for trucks to evacuate Manomajra Muslims. Sub-inspector saluted once more. He was conscious of the honor Hukumchand had conferred by trusting him with the execution of a delicate and complicated plan. He put on his raincoat. I should not let you go in this rain, but the matter is so vital that you should not lose any time, said Hukumchand, still looking at the ground. I know, sir. The sub-inspector saluted again. I shall take action at once. He mounted his bicycle and rode away from the rest house onto the muddy road. Hukumchand sat on the veranda, staring vacantly at the rain falling in sheets. The right and wrong of his instructions did not weigh too heavily on him. He was a magistrate, not a missionary. It was the day-to-day problems to which he had to find answers. He had no need to equate them to some unknown absolute standard. There were not many outs in his life. There were just ises. He took life as it was. He did not want to recast it or rebel against it. There were processes of history to which human beings contributed willy-nilly. He believed that an individual's conscious effort should be directed to immediate ants life saving when endangered, preserving social structure, and honoring its conventions. His immediate problem was to save Muslim lives. He would do that in any way he could. Two men who had been arrested on the strength of warrants signed by him should have been arrested in any case. One was an agitator, the other a bad character. In troubled times, it would be necessary to detain them. If he could make a minor error into a major investment, it would really be a mistake to call it a mistake. Hukumchand felt elated. If his plan could be carried out efficiently, if only he could himself direct the details, there would be no slips. His subordinates frequently did not understand his mind and landed him in complicated situations. From inside the rest house came the sound of the bathroom door shutting and opening. Hukumchand got up and shouted at the bearer to bring in breakfast. The girl sat on the edge of the bed with her chins in her hands. She stood up and covered her head with the loose ends of sari. When Hukumchand sat down in the chair, she sat down on the bed again with her eyes fixed on the floor. There was an awkward silence. After some time, Hukumchand mustered his courage, cleared his thought, and said, "You must be hungry. I have sent for some tea." The girl turned her large, sad eyes on him. "I want to go home. Have nothing to eat, and I will tell the driver to take you home." "Where do you live?" "Have something to eat. I will tell the driver to take you home." "Where do you live?" "Chundunagar, where the Inspector Sahib has his police station." There was another long pause. Hukumchand cleared his throat again. "What is your name?" Hasina Begum." "Hasina, you are Haseen. Your mother has chosen your name well. Is that old woman your mother?" The girl smiled for the first time. No one had paid for her compliment before. Now the government itself had called her beautiful and was interested in her family. "No, sir, she is my grandmother. My mother died soon after I was born." "How old are you?" "I don't know, 16 or 17, maybe 18. I was not born literate. I could not record my date of birth." She smiled at her own little joke. The magistrate smiled too. The bearer brought in a tray of tea, toast, and eggs. The girl got up to arrange the teacups and buttered a piece of toast. She put it on a saucer, placed it on the table in front of Hukumchand. "I will not anything. I have had my tea." The girl pretended to be cross. "If you do not eat, then I won't eat either," she said courteously. She put away the knife with which she was buttering the toast and sat on the bed. The magistrate was pleased. "Now do not get angry with me," he said. He walked up to her and put his arms around the shoulders. "You must eat. You had nothing last night." The girl wriggled in his arms. "If you eat, I will eat. If you do not, I will not either." "All right, if you insist." Hukumchand helped the girl up with his arm around the waist and brought her to his side of the table. "We will both eat. Come and sit with me." The girl got over her nervousness and sat in his lap. She put thickly buttered toast in his mouth and laughed when he said, "Enough, enough," through his stuffed mouth. She wiped the butter off his moustache. "How long have you been in this profession?" What a silly question to ask. "Why, ever since I was born. My mother was a singer and her mother was a singer till as long back as we know." "I do not mean singing, other things," explained Hukumchand, looking away. "What do you mean, other things?" the girl said haughtily. "You do not go about doing other things for money. I am a singer and I dance. I do not suppose you know what dancing and singing are. You just know about other things, a bottle of whiskey and other things. That is all." Hukumchand cleared his throat with a nervous cough. "Well, I did not do anything." The girl laughed and pressed her hands on the magistrate's face. "Poor Magistrate Sahib, you had evil intentions, but you were tired. You snored like a railway engine." The girl drew her breath in noisily and imitated his snoring. She laughed more loudly. Hukumchand stroked the girl's hair. His daughter would have been 16, 17, or 18 if she had lived. But he had no feeling of guilt, only a vague sense of fulfillment. He did not want to sleep with the girl, or make love to her, or even kiss her on the lips and feel her body. He simply wanted to sleep in his lap with her hand resting on the chest. "There you go again with your deep thoughts," said the girl, scratching his head on with her finger. She poured out a cup of tea and then poured it into the saucer. "Have some tea, it will stop you thinking." She thrust the saucer full of tea at him. No, I have had tea, you have it." "All right, I will have tea and you have your thoughts." The girl began to sip the tea noisily. "Hasina," he liked repeating the name Hasina. He started again. Yes, but Hasina is only my name. Why don't you say something? Hukum Chand took the empty saucer from her hand and put it on the table. He drew the girl closer and pressed her head against his. He ran his finger through her hair. You're Muslim. Yes, I am Muslim. What else could Hasina Begum be? A bearded Sikh? I thought Muslims from Chundunagar had been evacuated. How have you managed to stay on? Many have gone away, but the Inspector Sahib said we could stay till he told us to go. Singers are neither Hindu or Muslim in that way. All communities come to hear me. Are there any Muslims in Chundunagar? Well, yes, she faltered. You can call them Muslim, Hindu, or Sikh or anything, male or female, a part of Hijra. Are still there, she blushed. Hukumchand put his hand across her eyes. Poor Hasina is embarrassed. I promise I won't laugh. You are not Hindu or Muslim, but not in the same way as a Hijra is not a Muslim or Hindu. Do not tease me. What? I won't tease you, he said, removing his hand. She was still blushing. Tell me why the Hijras were spared. I will if you promise not to laugh at me. I promise. The girl became animated. There was a child born to someone living in the Hindu locality. Without even thinking about communal troubles, the Hijra were there to sing. Hindus and Sikhs, I do not like Sikhs, got hold of them and wanted to kill them because they were Muslim. She stopped deliberately. What happened? Asked Hukumchand eagerly. The girl laughed and clapped her hands the way Hijra do, stretching her fingers wide. They started to beat their drums and sing in their raucous male voices. They whirled round so fast that their skirts flew in the air. Then they stopped and asked the leaders of the mob, now you have seen us, tell us, are we Hindus or Muslims? And the whole crowd started laughing. The whole crowd except the Sikhs. Hukum Chand also laughed. That is not all. The Sikh came with their kirpans and threatened them, saying, we will let you go this time, but you must get out of Chindinagar or we will kill you. One of the Hijras again clapped his hands and ran his fingers in a Sikh's beard and asked, why? Will all of you become like us and stop having children? Even the Sikhs started laughing. That is a good one, said Hukumchand, but you should be careful while all this disturbance is going on. Stay at home for a few days. I am not frightened. We know so many people so well that, and then I have a big powerful magistrate to protect me. As long as he is there, no one can harm a single hair of my head. Hukumchand pressed her closer. A hot, feverish feeling came over him. Hasina. He cleared his throat again. Hasina. Words would not come out of his mouth. Hasina, Hasina, Hasina. I am not deaf. Why don't you say something? You will stay here today, won't you? You do not want to go away just yet. Is that all you wanted to say? If you do not give me your car, I cannot go 5 miles in the rain. But if you make me sing or spend another night here, you will have to give me a bundle of notes. Hukumchand felt relieved. What is money? He said with mock gallantry. I am ready to lay down my life for you. For a week, Iqbal was left alone in his cell. His only companion were the piles of newspapers and magazines. There was no light in his cell, nor was he provided with a lamp. He had to lie in the stifling heat, listening to night noises, snores, occasional gunshots, and then more snoring. When it started to rain, the police station became more dismal than ever. There was nothing to see except rain falling incessantly, or sometimes a constable running across between the reporting rooms and the barracks. There was nothing to hear except the monotonous patter of raindrops, an occasional peal of thunder, and then more rain again. He saw little of Jagga in the neighboring cell. On the first 2 evenings, some constable had taken Jagga out of his cell. They brought him back after an hour. Iqbal did not know what they had done to him. He did not ask, and Jagga said nothing, but his repartee with the policeman became more vulgar and more familiar than before. One morning, a part of 5 men were brought into the station in handcuffs. As soon as Jagga saw them, he lost his temper and abused them. They protested and refused to leave the reporting room veranda. Iqbal wondered who the new prisoners were. From the snatches of conversation that he had overheard, it seemed that everyone was on a spree, killing and looting. Even in Chundunagar, a few yards from the police station, there had been killing. Iqbal had seen the pink glow of fire and heard people yelling, but the police had made no arrests. The prisoners must be quite out of the ordinary. While he was trying to figure out who the newcomers were, his cell was unlocked and Jagga came in with a constable. Jagga was in a good humor. Sat Sri Akal Babuji, he said. I am going to be the servant of your feet. I will learn something. Iqbal Sahib, the constable added, relocking the cell. Teach this badmash how to go on the straight and narrow path. Get away with you, just Jagga said. Babuji thinks it is you and the government who have made me a badmash. Isn't that so, Babuji? Iqbal did not answer. He put his feet in the extra chair and gazed at the pile of the papers. Jagga took Iqbal's feet off the chair and began pressing them with his enormous hand. Babuji, my kismat has woken up at last. I will serve you if you teach me some English. Just a few sentences so that I can do a little gitmit. Who is going to occupy the next cell? Jagga continued pressing Iqbal's feet and legs. I don't know, he answered hesitantly. They tell me they have arrested Ramlal's murderers. I thought they had arrested you for the murder, said Iqbal. Me too, smiled Jagga, baring his row of even white teeth studded with gold points. They always arrest me when anything goes wrong in Mano Majra. You see, I'm a badmash. Didn't you kill Ramlal? Jagga stopped pressing. He caught his ears with his hands and stuck out his tongue. Toba toba. Kill my own village baniya, Babuji. Who kills a hen which lays eggs? Besides, Ramlal gave me a money to pay lawyers when my father was in jail. I would not act like a bastard. I suppose they will let you off now. The police are the kings of the country. They will let me off when they feel like it. If they want to keep me in, they will trump up a case of keeping a spear without a license or going out of the village without permission or just anything. But you were out of the village that night, weren't you? Jagga sat on his haunches, took Iqbal's feet in his lap, and started massaging his soles. I was out of the village, he answered with a mischievous twinkle in his eyes, but I was not murdering anyone. I was being murdered. Iqbal knew the expression. He did not want to encourage Jagga to make further disclosure, but once the subject had been suggested, there was no keeping Jagga back. He began to press Iqbal's feet with great fervour. You have been in Europe many years? Asked Jagga, lowering his voice. Yes, many, answered Iqbal, vainly trying to evade the inevitable. Then Babuji, asked Jagga, lowering his voice further, you must have slept with many Mem Sahibs, yes? Iqbal felt irritated. It was not possible to keep Indians off the subject of sex for long. It obsessed their minds. It came out in their art, literature, and religion. One saw it on the hoardings in the city and advertising aphrodisiacs and curatives for ill effects of masturbation. One saw it in the low courts and marketplaces where hawkers did a thriving trade selling oil made of the skin of sand lizard to put life into tired groins or increase the size of the phallus. One read it in the news advertisement of quacks who claim to process remedies for barrenness and medicine to induce worms to yield male children. One heard about it all the time. No people used incestuous abuse quite as casually as did the Indians. The terms like Sala, wife's brother, would like to sleep with your sister, and Susara, father in law, I would like to sleep with your daughter, were as often terms of affection for one's friends and relatives as expressions of anger to insult one's enemies. Conversation on any topic, politics, philosophy, sport, soon came down to sex, which everyone enjoyed with a lot of giggling and hand slapping. Yes, I have, Iqbal said casually, with many. Wah wah, exclaimed Jagga with enthusiasm and vigorous of pressing Iqbal's feet. Wah, Babuji, great. You must have had lots of fun. The Mem Sahibs are like houris from paradise, white and soft, like silk. All we have here are black buffaloes. There is no difference between women. As a matter of fact, white women are not very exciting. Are you married? No, Babuji. Who will give his daughter to a badmash? I have to get my pleasure where I can get it. Do you get much of it? Sometimes when I go to Firozpur for a hearing and if I save some money from lawyers and their clerks, I have a good time. I make a bargain for the whole night. Women think as with other men, that means two, or at the same time three times. He twirled his mouse stick. But when Jagat Singh leaves them, they cry hi hi, touch their ears, says Toba Toba, and beg me in the name of God to leave them and take the money back. Iqbal knew it was a lie. Most young men talk like that. When you get married, you will find your wife a match for you, Iqbal said. You will be holding your ears and saying Toba Toba. There is no fun in the marriage, Babuji. Where is the time or place for fun? In summer, everyone sleeps out in the open, and all you can do is to slip away for a little while. Get over with things before your relations miss you. In winter, men and women sleep separately. You have to pretend to answer the call of nature at the same time at night. You seem to know a lot about it without being married. Jagga laughed. I don't keep my eyes shut. Besides, even if I am not married, I do a married woman's work. You also answer calls of nature by arrangement. Jagga laughed louder. Yes, Babuji, I do. That is what has brought me to this lockup. But I say to myself, I had not been out that night, I would have not the good fortune of meeting you, Babuji. I would not have chance to learn English from you. Teach me some git mit like good morning, will you, Babuji Sahib? What will you do with English? Iqbal asked. The Sahibs have left. You should learn your own language. Jagga did not seem pleased with the suggestion. For him, education means knowing English. Clerks and letters writers who wrote Urdu and Gurmukhi were literate, were not educated. I can learn that from anyone. Bhai Meet Singh has promised me to teach Gurmukhi, but I never seem to get started. Babuji, how many classes have you read up to? You must have passed the 10th. The 10th was the school leaving examination. Yes, I have passed the 10th. Actually, I have passed 16. 16? Wow, wow. I have never met anyone who has done that. In our village, only Ramlal has done 4. Now he is dead. The only one who can read anything is Meet Singh. In the neighboring village, they haven't even got a bhai. Our Inspector Sahib has only read up to 7 and the Deputy Sahib to 10. 16, you must have lots of brain. Iqbal felt embarrassed at the effusive compliments. Can you read or write anything? He asked. I know. My uncle's son taught me a little verse he learned at school. It is half English and half Hindustani. Pigeon, kabutar udan, fly. Look, dekho, Usman, sky. Do you know this? No. He didn't. Didn't he teach you the alphabet, the ABC? He didn't know it himself. He knew as much as I do. ABC, where have you been? Edwards Ed. I went to Mon. You must know this one. No, I don't know. I don't know this either. Will you tell something in English? Iqbal obliged. He taught Jagga how to say good morning and good night. When Jagga wanted to know the English for some of the vital functions of life, Iqbal became impatient. Then the 5 new prisoners were brought into the neighboring cell. Jagga's jovial mood vanished as fast as it has come. By 11 o'clock, the rain had dwindled to a drizzle. The day became brighter. The sub inspector looked up from his cycling. Some distance ahead of him, the clouds opened up, unfolding a rich blue sky. A shaft of sunlight slanted across the rain. Its saffron beams played about on the sodden fields. The rainbow spanned the sky, framing the town of Chundunagar in a multicolored arc. The sub inspector drove faster. He wanted to get to the police station before his head constable made an entry about Malli's arrest. It would be awkward to have to tear off pages from the station diary and then face a whole lot of questions from some impertinent lawyer. The head constable was a man of experience, but after the arrest of Jagga and Iqbal, the sub-inspector's confidence in him had been somewhat shaken. He could not be relied on to handle a situation which was not routine. Would he know where to lock up the prisoners? He was a peasant, full of awe of the educated middle class. He would not have the nerve to disturb Iqbal, in whose cell he had put a charpai and a chair and table. And if he had put Jagga and Mali together in the other cell, they would by now have discussed the murder and dacoity and decided to help each other. As the sub-inspector cycled into the police station, a couple of policemen sitting on a bench on the veranda got up to receive him. One took his cycle, the other helped him with his raincoat, murmuring something about having to go out in the rain. Duty, said the sub-inspector pompously. Duty? Rain is nothing. Even if there was an earthquake, duty first. Is the head constable back? Yes, sir. He brought in Mali's gang a few minutes ago and has got to his quarters to have tea. Has he made any entry in the daily diary? No, sir. He said he would wait for you to do that. The sub-inspector was relieved. He went into the reporting room, hung his turban on a peg, and sat down in a chair. The table was stacked with registers of all kinds. One large one with its yellow pages, all divided into columns, lay open before him. He glanced at the last entry. It was in his own hand, about leaving about his leaving Mano Majra rest house earlier that morning. Good, he said aloud, rubbing his hands. He slapped his thighs and ran both his hands across his forehead and through his hair. Right, he said loudly to himself, right. A constable brought him a cup of tea and stirring it all the time. Your clothes must be wet, he said, putting the table on the tea on the table, and giving it a last violent stir. The sub-inspector picked it up without looking at the constable. Have you locked Malli's gang in the same cell as Jagga? Toba toba, explained the constable, holding his hands up to his shoulder. Sir, there would have been a murder in the police station. You should have been here when he brought Malli in. As soon as Jagga saw him, he went mad. I have never heard such abuse. Mother, sister, daughter. He did not leave one out. He shook the bars till they rattled. We thought the door would come off its hinges. There was no question of putting Malli in there, and Malli would not have gone in, any more than a lamb would into a lion's cage. The sub-inspector smiled. Didn't Malli swear back? No, he really looked frightened and kept saying that he had nothing to do with the Mano Majra's dacoity. Jagga yelled back saying that he had seen him with his own eyes and he would settle scores with all of them and their mothers, sisters and daughters once he was out. Malli said he was not afraid of him any more, since all Jagga could do now was to sleep with his weaver girl. You should really have seen Jagga then. He behaved like an animal. His eyes turned red. He put his hand on his mouth and yelled. He beat his chest and shook the iron bars. He swore that he would tear Malli limbs from the limb. I have never seen anyone in a rage like that. We could not take any chances, so we kept Malli in the reporting room till Jagga's temper was down. Then we moved Jagga into the Babu's cell and put Malli's men in Jagga's. It must have been a good tamasha, said the sub-inspector with a grin. We all have some more. I am going to release Malli's men. The constable looked puzzled. Before he could ask any question, the sub-inspector dismissed him with a lordly wave of hand. Police policy, you know. You will learn when you have been in the service as long as I have. Go and see if the head constable has had his tea. Say it is important. A little later, the head constable arrived, belching contentment. He had the smug expression of one ready to protest against any commendation of his efficiency. The sub-inspector ignored the modest smile the other wore and asked him to shut the door and sit down. The head constable's expression changed from contentment to concern. He shut the door and stood on the other side of the table. Yes, sir. What are the orders? Sit down, the sub-inspector said. His voice was cool. There is no hurry. The head constable sat down. The sub-inspector rotated the sharp end of the pencil in his ear and examined the brown wax which stuck to it. He got a cigarette out of his pocket and tapped its tap on the matchbox several times before lighting it. He sucked it noisily. The smoke poured out of his nostrils, rebounded off the table, and spread into the room. Head Constable Sahib, he said at last, removing a bit of tobacco from his tongue. Head Constable Sahib, there are lots of things to be done today, and I want you to do them personally. Yes, sir, answered the head constable gravely. First take Malli and his men to the Mano Majra. Release them where the villagers can see them being released, near the temple, perhaps. Then inquire casually from the villagers if anyone has seen Sultana or any of his gang about. You need not say why, just make the inquiries. But sir, Sultana and his lot went to Pakistan. Everyone knows that. The inspector put the end of his pencil in his ear again, rubbed the wax on the table. He took a couple of pulls at the cigarette, and this time potted his lips and sent jets of smoke bounding off the register onto the head constable's face. I do not know that Sultana has gone to Pakistan. Anyway, he left after the dacoity in Mano Majra. There is no harm in asking the villagers if they know when he left. Is there? The head constable's face lit up. I understand, sir. Are there any other orders? Yes, also inquire from the villagers if they know anything about the mischief the Muslim leaguer Iqbal had been up to when he was in Mano Majra. The head constable looked puzzled again. Sir, the Babu's name is Iqbal Singh. He is a Sikh. He has been living in England and has had his long hair cut. The sub-inspector fixed the head constables with a stare and smiled. There are many Iqbals. I am talking of a Muhammad Iqbal. You are thinking of Iqbal Singh. Muhammad Iqbal can be a member of Muslim League. I understand, sir, repeated the head constable, but he had not really understood. He hoped he would watch, he would catch up with the scheme in due course. Your orders will be carried out. Just one more thing, added the sub inspector, getting up from the table. Get a constable to take a letter from me to the commander of the Muslim refugee camp. Also remind me to send some constables to Mano Majra tomorrow, where the Pakistan army chaps come to evacuate Muslim villagers. The head constable realized that it was meant to help him understand the plan. He made a mental note of it, saluted a second time, and clicked his heels. Yes, sir, he said and went out. The sub inspector put on his turban. He stood by the door looking into the courtyard of the station. The railway creeper on the wall facing him had been washed by the rain. Its leaves glistened in the sun. The policeman's dormitories on the left side had rows of charpais with bedding neatly rolling on them. Opposite the dormitories were the station's two cells, in reality just ordinary two rooms with iron bars instead of bricks for the front wall. One could see everything inside them from anywhere in the courtyard. In the nearer cell, Iqbal sat in a chair with his feet on the charpai reading a news magazine. Several newspapers lay scattered on the floor. Jagat Singh was sitting, holding the bars with his hands, ideally staring at the policeman's quarters. In the other cell, Malli and his companion lay sprawled on the floor talking to each other. They got up as the head constable and three policemen with rifles entered carrying handcuffs. Jagat Singh took no notice of the policeman going into the adjoining cell. He thought that Malli was probably being taken to court for a hearing. Malli had been shaken by Jagat Singh's outburst. He was frightened of Jagat Singh and would sooner have made peace on the other's terms than go about in the fear of violence, for Jagga was the most violent man in the district. Jagat Singh's abuse had made that impossible. Malli was the leader of his own band and felt that after Jagga's insult he had to say something to regain his prestige in the eyes of his companions. He thought of several nasty things he could have said if he had known that Jagat Singh was going to return his offer of friendship with abuse. He felt hurt and angry. If he got another chance, he would give it back to Jagga, abuse for abuse. Iron bars separated them, and in any case, there were armed police about. The policeman handcuffed Malli and his companions and linked all the handcuffs to one long chain attached to the constable's belt. The head constable led them away. Two men armed with rifles kept the rear. As they emerged from their cell, Jagga looked up at the Malli and then looked away.